Hi, Nick.
Hello, Mr. Benjamin.
How you going?
I'm good. I'm good. Ready for another video recording?
Always. We used to do our podcasting in a dark room in our old co-working space, so this is much preferable. I don't have to smell you. We're in different cities.
Hey, we missed last week too because I was down in Noosa doing a photo shoot.
Pretending you're a photographer again.
No, I was doing the first photo shoot in about 5 years, which was like going back into an old world. But it's a good opportunity to get back on the tools and actually think about creating images and some of those problems that happen on the ground.
Yeah,
So
because I guess it's like you learned a lot from when you first started doing photography, as in when you used to be a freelance photographer, but you get further and further away from it. So it's good to know that the old tools still work, or check out what's changed, all that sort of stuff.
yeah, and just the internal conversations because I did a shoot for a
We
friend.
don't need to know about your internal conversations, not internal monologues. Sorry.
So, sitting in an architect's office for a week, hearing the conversations and hearing the struggles of what they're trying to capture or what they need the images to do or the parts of the building they're really concerned about and unpacking all of that. This project was particularly interesting because it was a very large renovation and it's got a legacy story. So it's got all these competing forces. The background is that this is being shot for the Architecture Awards in Queensland and it's going into what they call alts and ads, which is basically a renovation.
Are you allowed to say who you're doing it for? I assume you are.
For Jolly and Robinson. So, old mate, I posted that on LinkedIn last week, being on site, taking a photo of this project. And the house is called the Dragon House. And this has this whole story because John Mainwaring did this project. It must have been, I'm guessing, 20 or 30 years ago.
Who's
And
that?
that's another architect from the Sunshine Coast. And
Is he
so
like a prolific architect up there, or
he's a well known, locally known architect up there. And the background is the Sunshine Coast has this little ecosystem of architects that have been up there for a long time. So people like Gabriel Poole, who was, he was probably one of Australia's most well known architects, is from this area. So for a very small
he'd
place,
be in the top five, right?
easily, yeah. He's an Australian gold medalist for architecture. And so this little area punches well above its weight,
Mm.
probably because you've got some of the wealthiest people in the world to live there and build beach houses. And so you end up with these very large houses and I guess lots of room to play with the buildings. Anyway, the story is that there's a legacy that's happening in this small place. As these older architects are retiring, they've got all these buildings that have really impacted that area. And so when you're renovating one of these projects, there's a lot of sensitivity going into the previous architect's work, but also their legacy of what's being restored or changed. That's part of the challenge of renovations. Obviously, if the renovation was just an average house, you wouldn't think about it too much. You're just updating it or improving it. Whereas this is really the combination of two architects' work and how you present that, both visually, but also on a story side.
I got a question for you. We talk a lot about preparing a photographer for a shoot, and I was just wondering, did you eat your own dog food when it came to understanding the story of the house before you went out on the shoot? Did Jolien do the storytelling beforehand, or did you slip into old bad habits?
Well, I wish I could say that we did that really well. What actually happened is we went in there. So I had the whole week. So we had several days, which is unusual for a photo shoot.
Yeah.
Normally, you would be in there for half a day or a day in and out. But because I was staying there for the week, we could actually spread it out. So we went in on day one, had the tour, and I'm getting the story.
Okay.
But what was interesting is it actually took several days to really understand the story or the sensitivities of the project. That was a bit more challenging. So, as an example, when you go in with fresh eyes, you just see it as a building, whereas the architect is looking at exactly what they've worked on. And they're going to have things that they really love and things that they would rather not focus on. That's really challenging because you don't know that until you've taken the photos and then somebody says, oh, I just hate that roof line. And it's like, yeah, but the shot's really good. Nobody else can see that. But for the architect, there's an emotional attachment to that one element in the building.
Can you give any specific examples from this one? Are you, is it
Yeah,
is
there
it
was just
speaking out of school or?
well, there's just a roof line, which to me, the roof line is in the background because this building is quite a complex building. This is the other element, which is really hard. The house is large. So it's a 6-bedroom house. It's on the beachfront. It's got something like 3 lounge rooms. It's got 2 or 3 staircases. Everything is separated into these zones where you're going up and down. It's probably one of the most
Like, it sounds like an Escher painting. Stairs
it's
going
like,
everywhere.
it takes a while to even map it out in your head.
Yeah.
Because you've got elements where you're going down a stair, then up a stair to get out of a building, which takes you to another level. There's a lot going on. Part of that challenge is you're trying to communicate how this whole building works. 2, because we were doing it for the architecture awards, we're having to do it for a very specific purpose, which is alts and ads. So you're trying to focus on the new work. You've only got 10 shots. So the architecture awards are limited. In a renovation, especially in a large house, to actually illustrate this building, I think you could easily use 20 images because you've got all the before shots, you've got context shots, you've got all these different spaces.
It's such an interesting limitation that the awards, obviously we're talking about the AIA awards here in Australia, but that putting that limit of 10, like I understand functionally why you would do it, but it's putting a lot of pressure on each of those shots to fully tell the story of the design, of what it is that you're trying to tell for the award.
Yeah, and it's also categorized. So it's not just 10 shots. You have 2 context shots, 3 exterior shots, 3 interior shots, and then 3 building shots. And maybe I've added a shot somewhere in there. But so it's very prescriptive. So if you've got a large house and unless you have a consistent style, so let's say all your bedrooms, your kitchen, your lounge rooms, they all match. If you don't have that, and what you actually have is themed zones, if you take a photo of a bedroom and then compare it to a kitchen and then compare it to the barbecue area, you wouldn't be able to tell that that's the same building because theme isn't flowing through. That's what's really hard. If you had a video, you would naturally flow through the building and you would go, oh my God, this is amazing. I'm exploring and I get all these little gems. But if you're doing it with still photography, it just feels disconnected. And so we spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to get a set of images which tells the story of the new work and some context without getting confused.
Had they redone all of the interiors, or did we have sort of like shabby interiors and then brand new sparkling interiors? Like, what was the actual makeup?
Yeah, so you end up with the old bones, which I assume was probably 90s. Everything's been renovated. It's a beautiful house. And then there's the new works, there's a lot of timber, a lot of light as well, which again, just to add a little bit more complexity, there's so many windows that you have light coming into the building from every single point of the day. So there's no point of the day where you've got a clear shot. Everything is blowing out a lot. All the rooms, they've all been renovated. They're all beautiful. There's 3 or 4 different bathrooms, but there's a lot of different themes and characters for each of these rooms. They're almost like wings. And again, this makes for a great experience if you're walking through the building. Very hard to tell the story in 10 images. And
yeah, I think that 10 image limitation seems like the trickiest thing, because like thinking of it from a journalist's point of view, that would be the story that I'd be telling. Like, that's the most interesting part. You can't understand this house. It's a house of many personalities. It's a house of multiple times. The original, the renovation, and then the new. That's the story to me. And so if you're telling that even in a print context, because in a print context you're not really looking at more than 10 images. That is tricky, but it's also where the story is.
So here's another interesting thing, which is normally in a house you're going to have a hero shot. A single detached house is separated from other buildings. You have this gap in your photos, and this gives you the hero shot because it gives the building an identity. And It's much harder to get that on an interior shot because you don't have that edge. Everything blends into the rest of the building. Now, when you're dealing with a renovation, a lot of the hero shot is the old work. It's not the new work. So you're taking a photo of a building from 30 or 40 years ago. And if you're an architect trying to illustrate what you've done, that shot doesn't do it. So now you're having to zoom in and start with a different shot to tell that story. So it's tricky.
Well, it's interesting. You posted on LinkedIn about this exact challenge, right? Yesterday, I think it was. And Kate Kennedy from Archie, it's another Queensland architect, but she posted one of their projects, Cummings House, which just quietly, I think it needs a different name because I'm guessing that's the name of the owner, maybe, I'm assuming. Yeah, Robert Cummings. So maybe it's the original house by Robert Cummings. Okay, that makes more sense to the story because you're talking about an original house that people might actually know. Anyway, but this is the old house, and then it's got like this amazing, very Queensland pavilion with the sloped roof and all of that.
Yeah, and Skillions.
Yeah, Skillion, thank you. And she made the point, yeah, that's where the tension between those two, which I think the other one just looks like the terracotta tiled roof, not very Queensland at all in its vernacular. There are those houses in Queensland, but you wouldn't associate it with that. And it is that relationship between the two that's really interesting. But even looking at those photos by our good friend Andy McPherson, the hero shot is the new architecture because that's the bit that's the most interesting. But from the story point of view, from my point of view as a journalist, I really want to see it moved across slightly so you do genuinely see the way that they're interacting, because you just get this glimpse of the old house and you see that the skillion roof actually kicks up as it gets towards the roof of the old house. And I love that moment, but I kind of just, I want to move the camera left a bit and get the whole lot in there so that I can see it.
In this context, this is the first time I've been on site and we're talking about, what can we do? And somebody said, the builder has a videographer, a guy who does video. And I was like, get them in as soon as you can. I'm happy to have some space here because I think you need that to be able to link these spaces together. I guess different types of buildings, and some work very well for still photos and others, you just can tell the story in different ways.
You got different tools in your tool belt to capture a story.
I think a couple of years ago, the Institute of Architects were asking for video, but I don't know if they do anymore.
I think when we were speaking to Vic Chapter, I think they say you can include video, but it was a requirement there for at least 1 year.
I think video is super important now. I think I'd put it in every project so that you can actually flow through, because it's getting easier too. So,
and cheaper.
There's all these, cheaper. So you have all these gimbals, you have 3D cameras. So being able to walk through with a Insta360 stick and actually then control the shots afterwards. Well, here's another interesting thing. This was a very big house that we were photographing. We're talking $20-30 million of house. It has really large voids. It's on a slope going down to a beachfront. On the beach side, it's 3 stories high. You have all these voids everywhere. If you have a tripod with a standard camera, just to walk you through the process of taking these photos, you come in with a big tripod, you've got to choose your height, so you're changing all your legs, then you put your camera on top, you're leveling your camera, you're choosing your angle, you're doing all these settings, and you're fixed to about, your height might get up to 2 meters, and you've got a void which is 6 or 7 meters, and you spend all this time taking a shot. And there's a beauty in photography of taking your time to get that perfect shot, and you're aligning things. We ended up pulling out the drone and flying that drone through the building and being able to just go, I need to be 5 meters high. And just
how many pendant lights did you take out in the
Well, we were using I was just using a DJI Mini. So it's not a huge drone, but the propellers are exposed. And we've been playing with this for years.
We played with this in an Airbnb. Isn't that the one that we had in that Airbnb and we ended up like screwing the blades up?
Yeah, we have killed drones. So Ben and I have had this vision for years that we should be able to get a drone inside a house and be able to flow through and get this amazing video. And so we've played with, we've got this one here. which is the Hover X1. I think that's
Yep.
the original
Hover Air.
Hover.
Yep.
We've tried the Avatar. I don't know if you guys can see that on the screen. We tried that when that first came out. It's got all the blades and it's all protected, and we thought, oh, this is the drone, and it has goggles, and it turns out to be a racing drone, not a camera drone.
It wasn't like a refined, like you didn't feel like you had this, really granular control of it. It was like you can go really fast with that thing.
And it's loud. It feels
That's right.
It feels like a race car, and somebody's going to die when you fly it. So it's not the right drone for inside. But DJI has released the new Neo. I think that's what it's called. And that one is completely protected. It's very similar to, it looks very different to this one, but essentially same principle.
And it has the same thing. You can launch it from your hand, so you don't actually need the remote control, but they also sell it with a remote control. So.
Remote control, you can use goggles with it. You can use the stick. So it looks impressive. I was going to pick one up before this shoot, but I just ran out of time. So anyway, I was using the DJI Mini, and that saved us. That got us a whole range of shots from inside and outside that I wouldn't have been able to reach with a normal camera, which were functioning more like what you'd think is a camera shot, not a drone shot. So we're not doing big high shots. We're actually right in the middle of stairwells, in the middle of these voids, going through kitchens, or being on the other side of a balcony trying to shoot in. It was just all these angles.
You haven't got any of that footage, have you? I don't know if we can share screen on Riverside.
Sorry, everybody, as we figure this out.
While you're doing that, I was thinking maybe next time you're down in Melbourne, we should be looking for an architect or a practice that has a project that we could go and fly one of these things through.
Yes,
you need a very trusting client.
Yes, if you'd like to volunteer your project to us flying drones through the middle, please put your hand up.
We'll probably get too much interest, I'd say.
Just sharing my entire screen here, but I don't know if you can see those photos. But there's a whole range of shots here which are actually coming out of a drone. Like obviously you've got these high ones which you can see is from a drone. But there's other ones like this. This is a drone shot because you can choose your height and you can move through the space. You can just get a lot more shots in when you're
quick
really
succession.
Like, so another example, all of these are actually drone shots. So this is a drone shot in a big void.
Yeah.
So is this one. So outside of a stairwell, and we must be 2 or 3 meters up in the air there. So in this particular context, even this shot was a drone shot as well, where you're being about 2 meters high in the air and you're trying to get high enough to be able to tell the story of all the roofs. If you're down low, everything just blends in and what you see is a carport. So it was a challenging shoot. One of the things that did make me think about is the future of drones inside. I can see they're going to be used a lot more. They're not perfect, obviously, because the resolution's not as high and they're hovering and low light performance. But it did make me think that eventually AI is going to help you aim that drone to get shots. So the ability to do, let's say, a kitchen, it should be able to identify that kitchen bench and get a 1-point perspective and choose your height and do all of those things very accurately, and then get image stabilization to actually be able to just sit there and hover. So
you can see sort of just, with AI, you just kind of let it go. You just go and grab all this stuff, and then you're just looking at the the shots afterwards.
Yeah, because you can train that AI on all the architectural photography and find patterns. So what is the height that makes a kitchen look really good? How much of the bench do you see and what elevation is that? You can combine it with things like sun data. You'd be able to know that the sun path is going in this direction, and at 3 o'clock, light's going to be coming through that window. So there are I can see some really cool things. Whether or not architectural photography is a big enough market to warrant all the training of the AI and those things.
I think what's really interesting, like the amount of money that architects spend on photography generally, bit of a generalization, but, we spoke to people in the US who are paying like $10,000 for a photo shoot in a house similar to the one you went and photographed for Jolien. The investment in the equipment, so let's say the DJI Neo, I think that's around the $500 mark. The Hover Air is, I think, $800. That's probably gone down since we bought that one. And the 360, how much is the 360?
What is it? Under 1,000? I think it's...
Yeah. So they're these little things, and these are business expenses. Like this is kind of fun. Like if you run an architecture practice, go and buy one of these, because you're going to be able to claim it on tax. But those new ways of telling story, you may only pick up a couple of social posts from each project that you run through with it. The value of that, the value of understanding a space in a different way compared to just the 2D image is you're going to understand so much more of the story. Like I was just thinking about you being able to capture that roof, the multiple different roofs in Jolien's project. And you go, well, the architects know that because they drew all of the roof lines. They had to detail all of the junctions of old and new, but you don't really appreciate that again. Once the project is done, people are just living in the space. You're not really thinking about those things. You may never actually get that angle that shows you that, but being able to capture it is an amazing story that you can tell to the next client who walks through the door and says, oh, there's roofs all over the place in this place that we're trying to renovate. They go, well, here's an example of something we've already done. Just those little things where, like, once you have the equipment, you just take it with you when you go on site and you just record and see what you get.
The other one is tight spaces. So this house had all sorts of small stairs up and down. To get to almost every bedroom. There was a little stair, and you jump up a few stairs, and then you have this little ensuite, which was beautifully done, but to capture that with a 24mm lens, you can go wider than that, but you're not capturing what it feels like to be in that space. It's not going to be captured with a single shot, but you could take a 360 through there and actually walk straight into the bathroom and get a sense of the reveal of here's another little gem in this house. I felt like the whole house was hidden gems, and it's just a different experience of how we tell stories.
The hidden gem house. There you go. Stories coming out.
One of the other interesting sides of this was, as we're trying to write the story and we're starting to fill out Bowerbird, using Bowerbird to be able to write the awards entry. So we're just testing this out. Because a Bower Kit now has all of these tools, like put in all this existing information. So we could put in the website of the previous architect's webpage, which describes what their perspective of that story was. And then walking the architect through how to ask questions. It was fascinating. So here's a little insight. Jolien and his team naturally go and they're starting to write a description. Where do we start? We'll start writing this text and we'll go through the criteria. And it's like, hey, stop. What you do before that is go ask yourself all these questions. Just put them in dot points and then let AI craft all the words for you. Otherwise, you get bogged down trying to craft words instead of getting the information out of your head.
This is where ArchiSpeak creeps in. The interesting thing about ArchiSpeak, and the reason that it's sort of different to other technical jargon like medical jargon, stuff like that, is that you can see how architects' brains are trained to put words or sentences together in that way. Because that's what you do with a building. We're going to start with a bit of a sketch, and then we're going to go, okay, well, let's delve in and let's get this junction here between this roof and this roof to really sing for us. Yeah, it's this refinement of stuff to the point where it becomes poetry, right? Within architecture, it's visual poetry. It's practical, but once you give them text, there's no limitations. You can say whatever you want and at the same time say absolutely nothing at all.
I would be recommending to all architects, if you're doing awards right now, because I think entries are closing in the next couple of weeks, don't try to write your description first. Go and do the research. Just ask yourself questions, write down dot points, then either feed that into ChatGPT, feed it into a Bower Kit, use AI Writer, write your description last. Because it was amazing, even just with a link to the old project, AI Writer was able to get the structure of a really good description because it could pick up that this was a renovation. And so
Right.
it's the framework of a renovation story. It must be so familiar that it's talking about the past and the new and the combination of those two things, and just did it really well.
And so is this? I'm just having a look on Bell, but is this what's the name of the project?
It's called the Dragon House. It's probably hidden. You can probably see it as an
Yeah, I
admin,
can
but
see. Yeah, I can see
it's
one there,
it's
but
just
they
got a
haven't.
black image.
But the description, they haven't added the description yet. So
Not yet. I'm still working
I
through
just
it.
wanted to just wanted to see if I could have a look and see how well AI did in that process. Do you think they will? So like, do you think they've used AI, or have they defaulted back to no? We want to say exactly what we want to say.
I think they'll default back. What's interesting is their mind is very much on the awards, not the publishing. It's the award, which they're taking photos for the awards. So the
Yeah,
images
makes
are very
sense. Yeah,
specific for that. Whereas my head is always, okay, the awards are nice, but the real value is when you start to get published everywhere. And so they're different stories. I think part of that is just, I guess you get through the awards process, you enter the awards, that gives you the catalyst to get this content, and then figure out how you can actually use that content to get the publicity and then to drive all the audience to see
yeah,
the
yeah.
work that you're doing. But another interesting insight was just looking at AI interviews. Let's say you're dealing with the older architect. Now, the idea of sending them a link with a chatbot to AI interview them doesn't really work. So if you are using something like AI interview with some people, you probably need to walk them through it, pick up the phone and say, I've sent you a link, just answer the questions and feel
Well,
confident.
Well, I guess the other thing, we don't have this built into Bowerbird yet, but you now can, with your even just with your iPhone, you can record conversations and then grab the transcript and put that into Bowerbird as extra info. So there's lots of ways that you can just have a conversation with someone and ask questions. And if you've already gotten a list of questions from AI interviewer, then you can go through that process.
I was going to say that the ability to upload audio, to be able to go and have a conversation with somebody, or like you said, you can already do it with the transcript. That's how you get around that limitation. And suddenly you've got a rich story. I can see it. There's a beautiful story. This is a story of two architects. It's not even about the building. It's about, here are these two people who are working on this project, and all the sensitivities of you're working on somebody else's work, you're affecting the legacy, what's going to be remembered of them in a town, because the culture that you create as a younger architect is probably going to be applied to you as you get older too. For what was just a photo shoot, it was like this Pandora's box of this is a tricky one with so
Yeah.
much going on.
Dragon House revival, maybe Dragon House. I don't know, it's like hidden Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon House. I'm just thinking about like a way to actually like build in the tension that's there.
Yeah, absolutely. With the Battle of Two Dragons or something like
Yeah,
that.
the second dragon.
I'm sure architects have talked about this for years around legacy, and I'm sure there's an Acumen note. Acumen's the professional notes
Yeah,
of architects in Australia, which is talking about if you're working on somebody else's work, I think giving them a call, like touching base with them, letting them know that something's going to happen.
it's so funny though because there's been some very high profile projects in Australia. I think mainly in Sydney. And we had one here in Melbourne as well, where an existing architect, a still living architect or architecture practice, their work that's only 20 years old is being torn down or changed massively. We're talking more, mainly about public architecture, but feeling the weight of the responsibility to a living architect must be pretty full
Yeah.
on. Yeah,
Yeah, because you feel, I guess you've got empathy because that's your profession and you could be in that position at some point, and you put all your heart and soul into designing and building this thing, and then 20 years later it's being demolished. I think there's something hard there, which
yeah,
also makes me think about journalists telling these stories when they're so distant. You can see why some architects struggle with the writing of some journalists, because for the journalists, it's just another story that's coming across their desk, and they're trying to find the right photo, find the right story, and then it's done. Whereas for the architect, there's years of work that's gone into it. There's angst, there's reputation, there's a whole range of emotions. I guess they're wanting to feel like somebody is respecting that and being delicate.
I think what's interesting about that is the architects, like when architects complain about, well, rightly so, I think, complain about press release journalism or, these websites that just put the architect's statement up there, gets duplicated all over the place. I feel like that is a result of holding on too tightly to how a story should be told. Because what other options does that publication have? They either go and write new copy, which they could do quite easily now with AI. They write new copy, and then the architects come and berate them. You totally missed the point. Take that article down. And so what they end up doing is going, okay, you just tell me exactly what you want me to write, and I'll write it. And then there's a complaint that they don't do real journalism anymore. And I think that's again, we've spoken about this before, like print journalists, and I actually think the pandemic changed this a lot because you couldn't actually go and do site visits. But generally a print journalist, particularly freelancers, they're hired because they can go and do a tour of a house. They can go and spend potentially a day sitting in a house like Jolyon's and actually understand the spaces and therefore, be able to translate that to an audience. But nowadays I think it's happening less and less even in print. We know a lot of writers who all they do is a Zoom call. They might not even do a Zoom call. They might just look at the photographs and then write a story. And you can see how that would make for a very different story for this project you're talking about. Some of these more complex projects where actually seeing it is to understand it.
Which I guess on the flip side is there's opportunity there for journalists. So if you can dig into the story and try to understand it more, you may be able to find a different angle there that the copy and paste era hasn't really been doing justice to. So I guess it's depending on the way that you view it and how you approach it.
When I was freelancing, I would be hired because there is a project that I could go to. So it's like, we have a project in Melbourne. Who are our writers in Melbourne who can go and visit that project? That's why freelancers existed. So I think not chipping away at that is probably to the benefit of of a lot of writers.
You can see media is shifting. Like we can definitely see video is becoming more important. We can see publications being more involved in the production of content. So I wouldn't be surprised if you also see that coming back to some degree as a point of difference. The same as books. Like the number of publications which started off online who are now releasing their own books, where I wouldn't have thought book publishing is particularly profitable, but it's elevating their brand.
Book publishing is profitable generally, depending on the book, depending on how well it sells. Book publishing is always a risk with a longer return. So a magazine sits on the shelves for a month, potentially 3 months, whatever it is, and then that's dead, right? That you can't keep making money from that. With a book, you invest heavily up front, although, again, that's getting cheaper and cheaper to produce. They're not paying as much for photography and things like that. But that book you'll spend, let's just say it costs $200,000, probably way more than that, but $200,000. That return comes over 10 years. So you keep selling that same thing. So it's a slightly different economics to other publications.
And if people are wondering where book publishers find their content, go to bowerbird.io. Which is not untrue. We do have people who come in and they're looking for very specific content. We get emails from journalists all the time from weird places in the world looking for a very specific type of project. Because that's what a book is. You're trying to find that niche. Like tiny homes has been a massive topic for years now, which I assume is because everybody can imagine that they could have a tiny home. It's a possible aspiration rather than...
it's accessible, yeah.
It's accessible, yeah. And I guess with book publishing, you've got to have a topic which is broad enough to have a big enough audience to sell the book. And if it's too niche, I guess your sales drop.
I can imagine this slider of how niche you get. Like if you get really super niche, so you're talking about, I mean, it's not even that super niche, but let's just say sustainable architecture. Your audience is really small, but they're very passionate. And so anyone who's into sustainable architecture is probably going to come into contact, hopefully buy that book. So it's this sort of slider of then you get broader and the audience gets bigger, but you don't sell, you don't have the same level of passion. It's more of someone will pick it up because they see it on the shelf.
Another small tangent, but it is interesting how many architects self-publish their own books. If you see an architect...
Did somebody say vanity project?
if you see an architect with a book who isn't a star architect and isn't globally recognized, my guess is they've probably self-published that book,
Oh yeah.
which is not a bad idea. I mean, you've got clients who walk through the door and you've got this lovely book there. But yeah, I'm not sure how much of a seller those books actually are.
No, I imagine they don't. As you say, star architects, maybe some of those star architects or more popular ones, maybe they do sell a bit. You know, there was one that was published by, I think it was ARM here
Yeah.
years ago, and it was a beautiful book. I don't know who the publisher was, but
wasn't it called the Bible or something?
it looked like a Bible, and it was like black. I think it was like black and had like neon colors there. It was very ARM, but something like that, you can see how students would buy that as not necessarily as a text, but as a signal to say, hey, I'm an architect.
Yeah, we visited a studio in Berlin somewhere, and their entire marketing strategy for 30 years has been book publishing. That's the only thing they do. I don't know how well it works, but
do they? You mean self-publishing, or
yeah, they self-publish, and I think they've been doing it for 30 years. And I think the directors like doing it. So maybe vanity project.
It absolutely sounds like a vanity project. I don't think there's anything wrong with doing it. I just think it's a very expensive exercise without metrics on the other side. It just makes everyone feel good. And the question is that effective? Does that make a difference to your business?
So Ben and I would like to announce that we're releasing the Bowerbird book, the vanity project of Nick and Ben, with our random ramblings and photos from around the world.
Yeah, what would it be? Maybe instead we just do a whole book of the underlying code of Bowerbird. So you open source it, but you make it all in print. That sounds fun.
I thought actually, all the studios, opening up the studios around the world, like visiting them and actually showing all of these different workspaces. That would be a great book.
Because the only spaces that tend to get photographed are big studios or where someone spent a lot of money. But that's not what most architects and designers work in. They work in a dodgy little space under a railway line in Shoreditch.
Well, and if you could capture the real architect too. So most architects have a facade, same as all businesses and all people. We all wear masks to be professional or present ourselves to the world. But when you go and visit people and you spend a lot of time, you get to see the genuine person in these studios. And I find that story far more interesting, which it's fascinating. This is human side. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it looks like we've had technical difficulties. And we are back. We had a small technical glitch. No idea what happened there.
I blame, what were we talking about? I blame book publishing.
Book publishing.
Book publishing is, there.
Yes.
Big books. Big books. They're after us.
I think we got cut off. We were just talking about how architects write about themselves and versus what they're like in real life. And how we all have masks, and how if you tell your real story, it's far more genuine, but it's more interesting as well.
Yeah, I was thinking about your shoot that you did and the luxury, like, yes, it was hard because it was a long time, but the luxury of having multiple days to be somewhere and get to know it and get to understand the story, that doesn't happen very often for anyone, really.
No, like, it's rare to be able to do that. I think we could have used more days. It's exhausting. The hard part is going into a shoot like that, being a solo photographer in a big house. In hindsight, you really need assistance for the entire shoot. You probably want to map that shoot out a bit more like a movie production to go, here's the exact things we need. Here's when we're going to get in here and do this, which is hard because you're often dealing with natural light. You don't know when that building will shine. It could be at 4:00 in the afternoon and that kitchen is now, the colors of the panels just glows. And then there's other times you'll do exactly the same shoot the next day and those panels don't glow at the same time. It's interesting just watching the dynamics.
Well, because weather has a huge impact on, cloud cover, all of those things.
Yeah, and I think in this case, we talk about getting the story before you go and photograph something. I think actually outlining what your objectives are. In a big house like that now, I would recommend I would get it photographed at least more than one day. I don't think you could do that in a single day. You may even get it shot by multiple photographers. it's a challenging place where, for example, your typical house, you have a beautiful hero shot and that will carry the project. Whereas when you're dealing with interiors, you're probably looking for a specific photographer who's very good with the interiors and the styling. It just takes a lot of time when you're dealing with a big house. Because we had things such as what's the artwork on the wall? Okay, we're putting the artwork on and off. And so we're changing these scenes for different contexts, because we're also trying to get some photos for the owner to be able to use for rentals. And so you end up with these conflicting briefs where you're trying to do two things at once. It's like, okay, which one are we actually focused on?
Even just starting to think about like stylists as well, like the difference between an architectural stylist and an interiors focused, like consumer stylist, where you are thinking about something like Airbnb or, whatever high-end version of Airbnb you might be talking about.
Yeah, and you're just limited on time. So you can only spend so much time on a room or a space. So for example, we did do some shots where it was set up for Airbnb. The barbecue table is set up, and so it's overlooking the pool. That's a lifestyle shot. That is a very different photo to an architectural story shot. So you can't use that shot in your set, but you're spending time trying to get that photo. Another really interesting thing was for rentals or Airbnb, you need to have a photograph of every single bathroom. As an architectural photographer, you don't waste time on the bathroom which isn't going to be published. So you're prioritizing your time, but you need that for requirements to see if it's disabled accessible or not on Airbnb. So you have all these extra restrictions which just make it harder.
Because we always come from the publishing side, you don't think about all those other elements. I mean, if something's part of the story, then you want to capture it. Like the builder's there, which sometimes happens, especially if they're the client, then you'll get lots of the builder stories that are coming through. But the idea of, you've got the awards, which have those very specific limitations, and then you've got Airbnb, which have those limitations. You might have, because, we've spoken to a lot of real estate photographers as well, and they're looking for a different shot. They don't want a dark, moody, architectural, natural light shot. They want, let's turn all the lights on and make sure that this feels like the brightest, cleanest place anyone's ever seen.
What actually happened here was there was 3 briefs. You have an awards shoot, so it's very specific to the restraints of a renovation. Then you have a publishing shoot, which is, can this go out to a wider audience? And then you have an Airbnb audience, which is trying to describe what it's like to be in the space. So
I think you're right. I would hire 3 different photographers for each of those. Apart from anything else, you'd probably get better value from an Airbnb photographer than you would from an architectural photographer, because they're just setting up the shots to get the shot, and it'll be exactly what Airbnb needs, but a publisher probably doesn't want that level.
For Airbnb, I think you want a shot of people enjoying themselves. It's not actually about the building. The building is secondary to the person feeling like, I'm on holiday.
That's interesting, actually. Do Airbnb ever have people in their shots? I feel like I've never really noticed it.
Some do. I have seen some now where people hire a photographer and it's very much like a model shoot. We'll hire 2 beautiful people. You see the people. It's not blurred at all.
Did you say someone wants to hire us?
Yeah, we're fully booked. Sorry.
Fully booked.
We're still waiting for the first booking.
We only do 1 booking a year and we're fully booked.
So this is a lesson in validation. Great idea. Can you get that one person to sign us up? Yeah. And I think when people hire photographers, they're just thinking, I just hire a photographer and they can do everything. Where in reality, like this happens a lot in restaurants. The photographers who do the mood photos, like a lot of blurry shots, you don't see much. You just see like the menu and then everything fades off into black.
Yeah.
That's a very different photo than, can you explain what the architectural interior design of this space is? So being aware of that, it's choosing horses for courses. You've got multiple objectives and you may have to do multiple shoots. I think on a big house like that, it's worth it.
If you're trying to save money, something's going to be compromised. I think that's the thing as well. Like if you do have those very specific needs, well, make sure you're hiring the right person and paying the right amount for each of those jobs. Because if you're like, hey, we'll just cover off all 3 of those, then something's going to be compromised in that process.
Hey, you're a painter. You can do some plumbing as well, can't you?
Yeah.
Just
People don't ask us to do other things anymore.
No, it's good.
No one asks us to even do things we're good at, like building
Writing.
websites, writing. Anyway,
Well,
that's probably
folks,
a good time to wrap up.
I think we're coming up to an hour. Like always, if you've got any questions or if you've got any topics you want us to cover, just post a note wherever you see this video.
Yeah, ask us questions. We'll do our best to be entertaining.
Bye.
Bye. Just keep it.